Now that we have our chain link, let's create our full chains using those links. And we're going to build that off the top of our upper rings. We're there, but to keep our network clean, let's use an object merge. So let's drop an object merge. Let's pull in upper circle prims. And then, whoops, I'm going to color code that and name this in upper circle prims. Now we want to build the chains off of this top layer. So let's put down a blast node, and since that is the first copy, it is always going to be primitive 0. So let's delete non-selected, set it to primitives just to make sure it knows what group type we're doing. I'm going to call that isolate top prim. Now let's drop down a resample node. This is going to be our resample num of support chains. We'll link this up later. For now, we can just set the maximum segments to something like 5 and disable the maximum segment length there. Next, drop down an attribute wrangle. We're going to create a parameter called chain ID and set it to point num. So I at chain ID equals point num. Call that set chain ID. We're going to use that to build our curves, the same as how we have with some of our other curves. So let's drop down a copy and transform now. And we're going to duplicate this, move it up, and shrink it down. So let's just move it up like 1 unit for now, and then scale it down to 0. So now we have a copied primitive that is much smaller. Let's drop down an add node. And then the usual song and dance here. Delete geometry to keep the points. Go to polygons, by group, by attribute. And this is chain ID for this one. Now we have a curve per chain. Now that we have those, let's start adding our chain links in. So first, let's resample our curves so that they're being driven by the chain size. So let's add a spare input, pull in a chain link, and we're going to do bbox -1 d underscore z size for this one. And now let's move this over to make it a little more nice. Let's merge in our chain link. So we're going to go ahead and set up our copy to points. So chain link, and name that in chain link, color code it. Now copy to points. Link chain link in the first one, points in the second one. They aren't orienting because we haven't added our attributes. So let's add an orientation along curve on the right here. And there we go. The default settings are fine for now. So we'll see that we have 2 issues. One is that our chain links are touching end to end, which worked great for the crystals, but we want these to be interlocking. So we're going to have to adjust the spacing. The second is that we want every other link to be rotated 90 degrees. So we know that out and up are perpendicular to each other. So let's, on our orientation along curve, let's toggle this so that we're creating an attribute called out. And we're going to override this attribute with this attribute for every other point. And we'll do that right now. So drop down a group by range. This is a node that lets you set range patterns for groupings. So if I change the group type to point, I'm going to change the group name to odds. And it's selecting every point, because I'm telling it to select 1 out of every 1 points. But if I tell it to select 1 out of every 2 points, then it'll select every other point. And now, if we put down an attribute wrangle, we can tell it for odds to set the up from the out. Now every other chain is alternating. Next, let's adjust our spacing. First, I'm going to call this up from out, group odds. We'll just call that set orientation. It's doing a lot. And we'll call this resample by chain size, add chain curves, copy and scale. There we go. Cool. Nice and named. Now let's keep moving. We're going to adjust this spacing. So what we want to do is we want to shift this down based on the thickness of these chains. So we're going to get the radius of that circle that we copied. And the radius is only going to be half of this thickness. So if we multiply it by 2, then we'll get these fully intersecting each other, and we'll need to multiply it by 4 to actually get them to interlock, and we'll visualize that right now. So let's go up to the controls and go to the chain length thickness and Control-Shift-C to copy that parameter, and then go back to our resample, and we want to subtract and then paste relative reference. So when we do that, they're now halfway into each other, and if we double it, then they're going to fully penetrate, so they're lined up like that. So let's take it up to our full 4, which is double that amount. And now they are perfectly interlocking. Let's add a little bit of variance to this though. So drop down and attribute randomize. We're going to twist our up. Set our min value of all of these to -1, and set it to add instead of set. And just like our crystals, we can play with this to add a little bit of variance. Now let's add those to our controls. So I'm going to press Control-P, and in the chains folder, I'm going to drag that global scale and rename it chain twist variance. And then up on the resample, I'm going to drag the segments over, and I'm going to call that num of support chains. And then lay those out. Rename this last attribute randomize up. Wrap that in a network box. And those are our chains. The last thing we'll do, after we merge this down, the last thing we'll do is build a little support plate for these to merge into.